Okay, 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 okay. So I have wanted to read this book for a long time, and I took it out from the library here at Carleton University. That's where we're streaming at right now. I took it out last week, and I crushed it in 3 or 4 sittings. I'm going to say 4 sittings. Yeah, it was 4 sittings. It's a quick book. It's just under 200 pages, so it's doable. But it's a very dense book and a very challenging book. And if you're interested in not necessarily religion, but just spirituality or philosophical issues, metaphysical issues, I think, and cinema, then this is going to be of interest to you. So, and if you're a Paul Schrader fan, that's a bonus too. I just saw Master Gardener actually the Sunday before taking this book out, so like at the beginning of that week of last week, and I thought it was pretty cool. I really enjoyed watching it, and I really like that trilogy. First Reformed, The Card Counter, and then Master Gardener. So I think this is a good time to revisit this text of his. And, he also wrote The Last Temptation of Christ for Martin Scorsese. And, yeah. Taxi Driver is not religious, but not per se, but it does have... He was into, like, Albert Camus and, like, sort of, dreary existential thought like that. I shouldn't actually characterize it like that because I've never read Camus. But I have read this book, so here we go. Paul Schrader's Transcendental Style in Film Presentation. What does it mean? So basically for this presentation, I'm going to read these quotes and just sort of respond to it a little bit, sort of react to it live. I put these slides together yesterday, so I didn't really reread them. It's kind of like when I do these things, because I've got more of these coming down the pipes this summer. I want to get like 6 more done, and hopefully in June and July I'll get them all done. I want to do like one a week. So what I do is I take a picture of a page that I find intriguing. Then later on I'll pick out the quote that I want to focus on, or 2 quotes or whatever, and then I'll copy and paste it here, and now I'm just going to talk about it. That's like how I've got to figure it out so far, but things will probably change along the way. I don't know how, but hopefully it gets better in time. So, okay, what does it mean, transcendental style in film? Although transcendental style, like any form of transcendental art, strives towards the ineffable and invisible, it is neither ineffable nor invisible itself. So, yeah, he talks about basically how there's like this sort of built-in conflict about trying to like artistically capture something that's like intangible, and all you can do is really just like subjectively express it, because how we perceive the world spiritually is such a personal thing, that and cinema is so constructed and inherently collaborative that the things are kind of at odds. And say even if you're just like a painter, you're using certain tools where it's like mind and feeling. It's kind of like impossible to fully express. So that was page 1. And then page 7, the critical question about transcendental art is understandable, because the more pure and absolute such an art becomes, the less useful it is. Yeah, so within limitations, there's a lot of possibility, and it's kind of like when there are built-in limitations, you're not just like doing like a Jackson Pollock, you're not just like doing whatever, you're just doing your thing. You have to adhere to a certain code and to things basically that have come before you. Okay, page 10. Elements of the transcendental style can be detected in films of many other directors: Antonioni, Rossellini, Pasolini, Boissier, Renoir, Mizuguchi, Buñuel, Warhol, Michael Snow, and Bruce Bailey. So yeah, I took a class in Italian film here at Carleton University in September to December, and we looked at La Ventura by Antonioni, and the brilliant Tom McSorley, my professor, was talking about how Antonini, his existentialism is kind of like spiritualism with a lowercase s. I thought that was kind of an interesting way to say it. It's like looking at these spiritual issues without, attaching yourself to the stigma of Catholicism. So that's how he does it. Rossellini, I'm not like 100% familiar with all like his themes, like it was religious themes, but I did see The Flowers of St. Francis, which was written by Fellini, and the Pope is, in that he's like a Franciscan, right? He follows St. Francis. That's like his dude. So there's that. Pasolini. Well, he did the Gospel according to St. Matthew, which depicts Christ as more of like a socialist figure. And then I don't really feel comfortable ascribing any understanding of these other guys. What he said about Warhol was interesting, I remember, but I don't remember what it was, and I don't think it's in this presentation. Sorry. All right. So we do look at 3 directors, though, and the first one is Yasujiro Ozu. So we're looking at his Zen art approach, and there's a cool bonsai tree. All right, page 27. The most appropriate analogy for the cultural elements in Ozu's films is Zen art. Zen is not an organized religion with a physical and political concerns like Shintoism or Christianity, but a way of living which has permeated the fabric of Japanese culture. I kind of like that. I mean, not that I know much of anything about Zen other than what I've read in this book, but I kind of have a problem with Christianity in that sense, in that it's not just like a self-help group. It really is a political organization, and in its function, if you're a Christian and it works for you, that's fantastic. But for me, I kind of have a hard time separating the politics of the church with sort of moral guidance. It's a big problem for me. I find like there's like a lot of like contradictions that don't really help its image. And I can't say anything about Shintoism, but the idea of anything really just being a bridge to me is good stuff. So perhaps the basic principle of Zen art is the first koan of Zen, Mu, the concept of negation, emptiness, and void. Emptiness, silence, and stillness are positive elements in Zen art and represent presence rather than the absence of something. That's page 27. So that's incredibly deep. And I did read, talking about Zen, I did read the Hagakure, I think 2 summers ago. Maybe last summer, I don't remember. Or maybe 3 summers ago, whatever. And that book is, sort of says similar things. Emptiness as its own sort of form. And yeah, I can't wrap my head around it. Sorry, I got nothing. But it is a beautiful quote to sort of wrestle with. But most of all, Mu is expressed in Osu's codas. His films are structured between action and emptiness, between indoors and outdoors, between scene and coda. The conflicts are always explicited in indoors, usually in long, dispassionate conversations. And that's definitely true. I'm not actually very fluent with Ozu's career. I've seen maybe just 2 or 3 of his films. I like him, though. Environmental concerns. And there we got a bunch of bonsai trees. The bonsai tree within a bunch of bonsai trees. The greatest conflicts and the greatest resulting disillusionment in Osu's films is not political, psychological, or domestic, but is, for want of a better term, environmental. That the aged cannot communicate with the young. That the parents cannot communicate with their children. That the craftsmen cannot communicate with their children. That the craftsmen cannot communicate with the office workers. I think that is... Oh. Whatever. That's a little redundant there, but my bad. These are all dimensions of the problem of the modern Japanese cannot communicate with his environment. So, yeah, I think that's interesting. And I'm not sure if I have this quote, but later on, Schrader talks about the difference between the East and West, being the West wants to like control the environment, while the East wants to be in, like, it's more the environment is at the forefront, and it's about fitting into the environment, and really it's the environment within yourself. And there's a line in an Ozu movie where he says life is, one of the characters says life is actually very simple, it's just humans who complicate it. So that is interesting. I feel like we have so many made up problems like geopolitically that could just be undone with some of these with this approach. I feel like Raytheon should hear this. For the most part, disparity in Ozu's films is conveyed by a strange human density, which seems inappropriate to the clinically observed environment, and in which the moment of decisive action reveals itself to be a spiritual weight. Yeah. So, again, it's just like a totally different way of like being within the world that is a little difficult to grapple with a Westerner, but probably a good idea. A state of grace. Stasis is the end product of transcendental style, a I'm not going to get it, view of life in which the mountain is again a mountain. Step 3 may confront the ineffable, but its techniques are no more mysterious than steps 1 and 2. There's a definite before and after, a period of disparity and a period of stasis, and between them a final moment of disparity and a period of stasis, and between them a final moment of disparity and a period of stasis. Oh, redundant. Oops. And between them a final moment of disparity, decisive action, which triggers the expression of the transcendent. The transcendental style itself is neither ineffable nor magical. Every effect has a cause, and if the viewer experiences stasis, is with good reason. So yeah, it's like maybe we all have our own path. We all have our own path, and to enlightenment or to this state of grace or stasis, and how you get there can be determined differently than how someone else got there. But what is certain is there's a before and after. So, yeah. Okay, now we're going to Robert Bresson and his formalism. So, yeah, he's a cool filmmaker. I've seen his film Pickpocket. I think that is about it. But I was a big fan of it when I rented it on a VHS tape at the Invisible Cinemas in Diamond High School. So, I'm talking like probably 2004, 2005. Both Ozu and Bresson are formalists in the traditional religious manner. They use form as the primary method of inducing belief. This makes the viewer an active participant in the creative process. He must react contextually to the form. Yeah. So, like using certain techniques, cinematic techniques, is what's going to invoke the transcendental or religious component to their work, not so much performance. Like Ozu, Bresson has an antipathy toward plots. I try more and more in my films to suppress what people call plots. Plots is a novelist's trick. The plot screen establishes a simple, facile relationship between the viewer and events. When a spectator empathizes with an action, the hero is in danger. He can later feel smug in its resolution. The hero is saved. So yeah, that's like pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I remember Scorsese said he didn't like plot either. And people are always trying to use, I think it's storytelling, but you want to use the cinematic apparatus to relay what you're trying to relay, whether it's like a characterization or something that is more plot, like novelist style, or some sort of theme, intellectual theme that's still sort of characterized and in story mode, let's say. But yeah, that's cool stuff. I feel the same way. The ear is more creative than the eye. If I can replace a set by a sound, I prefer the sound. This gives freedom to the imagination of the public. This phenomenon helps you suggest things rather than having to show them. Page 69. So I definitely like sound design too. A cool sound design goes a long way, and there you can tell when there's been effort put into it, and it's sort of it's so vibe heavy, especially if you're going to have people in rooms talking. To have a more sound based approach, sound design being in the forefront. I think that makes a lot of sense. Transcendentally at odds. And that's a pretty cool picture. Bresson's aestheticism is certainly at odds with the movie tradition, which has zealously celebrated every asset of the physical, and its concern for spirituality, free will, predestination, and grace is only an oblique comment on contemporary French society. Like Bresson, Dreyer values asceticism. So asceticism is basically suffering for a certain religious belief. It's a little different than Stoicism. Stoicism is just, doing what's right no matter what. And asceticism is depriving yourself of sort of earthly pleasures, whether it's like, getting inebriated or sexual relations, to sort of to dig deeper and to understand something a little bit greater than self, or greater than the immediate. And physicality and earthly pleasures and wanting to instill a feeling of getting more close to this sort of like earthly pleasure of like living vicariously through someone, getting closer to seeing it, like experiencing things through their lens, is definitely like the movies, right? It's a little smutty, or I think Schrader calls it a junky film business. And so to try to relay your spiritual views is definitely an uphill battle in this business. So I found another quote on asceticism, but this focuses on Carl Dreyer, who is Danish. So like Bresson, Dreyer values asceticism. He has never questioned the need for suffering as means to revelation. Dreyer, also like Bresson, often structures his asceticism within the prison metaphor. The prison metaphor, Western theology, leads to death, the separation of the body and soul, whereas in Bresson, death leads to iconography, the disembodied soul. In Dreyer's death becomes reincarnation, the new body. Joan's death creates social upheaval. Certainly a lot to unpack there. You sort of exit society when you go to prison, so that is a form of death, or it's like such a huge disconnect that to see it that it leads to death does make sense. I would consider that based. No, I would consider that sound. How they view it differently though is interesting. So it's like they also view it as a prison metaphor, leads to death, separation of the body and soul. Bresson, death leads to iconography, the disembodied soul. So it's more about like living on, and like through culture, and for yourself, like a spiritual revelation. While Dreyer, it's more like political martyrdom, and serving the masses immediately. So definitely, it's like the same approach with different objectives, right? Okay, now we're all in on Carl Dreyer. So the late 19th and early 20th century Kammerspiel, literally chamber plays, were the immediate stylistic precedents for Dreyer's films. They influenced both his choice of subject and directorial method. Kammerspiel were a reaction against the elaborate showcase staging of classical drama. They desired to create an intimate theater in which the effective chamber music could be transferred to the stage. So I took note of this because I never heard of it before, and it sounded pretty interesting. And the idea of the mixing of music and like theater to create a sort of different effect, like sort of like a musical, sort of like an opera, but within a another cultural context in Sweden. So it's pretty interesting. An intimate theater, but I literally couldn't tell you any of these. When you Google image, do Google Images search for the KAMMERSPIEL, you get Carl Dreyer movie images. So there you go. All right. Although it appeared well after the crest of German Expressionism, Vampire is Dreyer's only exclusively expressionistic film. The Expressionism seems to have run away with the KAMMERSPIEL. There is little tension between the two. Both the subject matter, vampire's afterlife, and the technique, chiaroscuro, exaggerated gesture, non-realistic sets, rampant fantasy sequences, of Vampire exhibit a confident appreciation of the strengths of Expressionism and a calculated use of its method. So now we go to other art movements. So I wanted, before we talk about Expressionism, I wanted to point out chiaroscuro. So that is basically like a painting technique with contrasting and blending light and darkness, which has a strange, obscure effect. And then Expressionism is like a German art movement, started in painting and then came out in film in movies like the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, and it's like a distorted, nightmarish artistic movement which represents sort of pain and suffering in an extreme form that was born out of World War One. So yeah, Vampire is a good film. I've seen that one. I've seen Passion of Joan of Arc, and I've seen Vampire by Carl Dreyer. I couldn't tell you the Ozu movies. I forgot. Sorry, but Vampire is definitely cool. And both those movies are very different. And in the book they talk, I don't think I took this quote, but in the book they talked about how Dreyer notably changed it up a lot with his style, which, while Ozu is like constantly, it's like part of the Zen art thing. It's like constantly repeating the same thing, to like almost not like basically do a form of perfection. Like you do the same story again and again and again, and then eventually you perfect it. And even like past that, you just kind of keep refining it and keep sort of just moving the furniture around. While Dreyer is quite different in that regard. He's constantly changing it up. I would, if I was fortunate enough to have a filmography, I would probably go Ozu's route. Dreyer's Joan of Arc. Any attempts Dreyer may have made at Stasis collapse in the final moment of passion. Joan's martyrdom is thrown into the simmering social context. The crowds turn to riots. The soldiers forcibly suppress them, killing and injuring many. The sequence is filmed in an empathy-evoking manner. The footage is action cut, and the soldiers are seen a la Expressionism through graded bars from overhead. If he had any doubts, the last sequence takes the viewer off the transcendental hook. He may interpret Joan's death psychologically, sociologically, or spiritually, and given such a choice, the viewer's natural preference is for either of the first two. The closing shots of the Dreyer and Bresson Joan of Arc films are ironically dissimilar. Yeah, we were talking about how Bresson is about living on through iconography and through personal spiritual revelation. And he was like hermetic himself and apparently a huge pain in the ass, while Carl Dreyer is more like, socially conscious and people-oriented and, politically motivated. But they both use sort of this tale, right? This religious tale to go about sort of stating their own objectives culturally. And what's interesting is we talk about the Stasis, we talk about Dreyer and Bresson. When you read the book, they keep referencing everything you had just read throughout it, and so it does really kind of build and connects the dots nicely. That was one thing I enjoyed about the book. Okay, that's just from the Ten Commandments, the Cecil B. DeMille movie with Charlton Heston. So business as usual. The conventional religious film uses a style of identification rather than of confrontation. The style amplifies the abundant artistic means inherent to motion pictures. The viewer is aided and encouraged in his desire to identify and empathize with character, plot, and setting. For an hour or two, the viewer can become that suffering, saintly person or on screen. His personal problems, guilt, and sin are absorbed by humane, noble, and purifying motives. So it's basically through like easy identification and conventional storytelling, you kind of do this way that is not like transcendental in style. Like there's like a difference between doing like a movie about Jesus and doing a transcendental film, according to Paul Schrader, and he basically views the Hollywood system at this time, up until this point in 1972, is like not really delivering a transcendental sort of film. He looks elsewhere in this book to two European figures and an Asian figure, and it was definitely a challenging book. This was a challenging presentation to make. Hopefully these ones get better. I got other ones coming up down the pipes on Masaki Kobayashi, Quentin Tarantino, Federico Fellini, Dario Argento, and who else? Who knows what else? That's kind of what's in store for now. And like I said, I want to get basically want to get it done in June and July, maybe August. But I would love for your feedback about how I can make the next ones better. Thank you, Paul Schrader, for the book. Thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing to this channel. I had fun doing this. It was a little nerve-wracking, though, at the beginning. And it threw me off a little bit. But I did have fun in the end. So thanks for hanging out with me. And be well, guys.